Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hi, everyone. Today we have a very different yet very special episode. I'm going to ask for you guys to put your listening ears on because this is only the second time that I've had a non-medical professional here on our show, but I think that it's something that we can all find value in discussing, as well as coming together as a community to help with what we're about to talk about. So I would like to introduce to you someone who is special to me. Just some full disclosure, we went to college together way back when, maybe where some of you pre-meds are at in your current state. And I just want to talk about something on this episode that I think just gets to the core of why you all are here. So doctors typically go into this profession to help people. And I would like to use this time to let Rachel tell us a little bit about herself and her experience in order for us to see if we can learn something from what she went through, if you are personally going through that, or you know someone who is, or to just help spot signs and things that we can do to help our patients in the future. So I'm just going to ask you to tell us a little bit about you and your family and what you've been experiencing.
Well, thank you so much, for having me. I definitely wish we were speaking under better circumstances. Nonetheless, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Rachel Cardona Barnett. I am a first-generation high school graduate and, thereafter a college attending and graduate. So I think, it's really important to point that out in the context of this conversation, because a lot of times, what I'm going to discuss is domestic violence. A lot of times we attribute that to someone who is without education, without a means by which to better themselves. And I think that my naivety as it relates to believing that I was exempt because I had, broken the generational curse. I had, finished high school and went to college and thereafter got a master's degree, that I would be exempt from it. I was very naive in that thought. First and foremost, most importantly, I am the mother to 5 beautiful, wonderful little boys. They are truly the light of my life and my purpose and reason for pushing forward. One of my boys, I had them when I was in undergrad, when I met Q, and thereafter I had my other boys. And, my family was one that I thought would be exempt from the situation, but I found myself in a circumstance where I was in a relationship that was increasingly more toxic. It moved very quickly and soon became a very volatile and violent relationship, specifically as it relates to physical abuse, mental, financial abuse of myself and, my children as well.
Thank you for sharing that with me. And I just wanted us to talk about abuse because it's very common. Lots of women undergo it, as you mentioned, in all different forms of education, all socioeconomic phases of life. And it's something that we don't talk enough about. And in your circumstances, unfortunately, both you and your children underwent terrible experiences. I just want to know from your perspective as a patient, if you or your boys' doctors ever asked you about partner violence?
Absolutely. At every doctor's appointment, even, beginning with prenatal appointments, I was always asked the question, do I feel safe at home? Is anyone, observing me? So they definitely did their due diligence as it related to inquiring each visit if there were anything going on. To be completely transparent, initially there's such a stigma attached to it, and there's such a shame attached to being in a relationship where there's domestic violence. So, there were times during my prenatal appointments where I felt compelled to say something, but then it was a fear of, well, what will happen if I say something? Will they take my baby from me? Am I in a position, where I protect my child? So I think, for me, in the very beginning, I kind of allowed myself to not fully, to say, this situation is not so bad. I kind of sugarcoated it within my mind to believe I was not really a victim and that I could eventually get myself out of it. So there was nothing the doctors could do. So in the very beginning, I was not forthcoming. I said, I'm okay. We're all right, but they did ask.
Okay. And moving forward, as time progressed, you realized that this was a situation that you could not continue. So you decided to leave. Can you tell us about the experience of getting away and where you are now with life?
Absolutely. For me, as I stated, the situation, my relationship transpired and moved so quickly. Within 13 months of the time that I met my ex-husband, we had 3 children. I had a baby, and then thereafter I had a set of twins. So things just happened so fast. And at that point, during the pregnancy with the twins, I knew this relationship was not going to continue. I knew it was toxic, and it was becoming increasingly more abusive. But in my mind, I said, I have to empower myself to be able to get out of it. I don't want to live in poverty. I don't want my children live in poverty. So for me, it was education. I felt if I needed to get more education, then I would be in a better position to support my children. So it took about, in total, about 3 years from the time I realized that I had to get out of the relationship for me to actually get out of it and, get the divorce. With my ex-husband, it was just a lot of mind games, a lot of mental abuse, a lot of psychological abuse, a lot of blaming. And if you loved me the way you love these children, then things would be different between us. And I'm not so bad. There are worse things. But to get out of the relationship, ultimately, I had to agree to allow him to forego any financial responsibility to the children. I had to agree that I would be completely and solely responsible for their medical care, any costs that they incurred. And in addition to that, I had to be willing to sign over the house that was in both of our names that we had both contributed to. And it wasn't a second thought to me, absolutely. For me, nothing mattered but my children. I was very cognizant of the fact that the situation was becoming increasingly more volatile. And there had been threats of, to me that he was going to kill me. So I knew that I needed to get away. And, the best bet for my children and my safety was to let everything go and to move across the country because I needed to be somewhere where I was not readily accessible to him. So in I got divorced in March 2019, but in July of 2019, I packed my children up and we moved from Cleveland, Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona. And we already had the divorce dissolution agreement. There was no support from him, and I was fine with that. And my boys and I started over. That was what was necessary. And our journey was actually a beautiful one. My children immediately thrived. Their grades improved. They began more social. They became more comfortable. They were free. And it was really wonderful. And it really affirmed my decision to leave. Unfortunately, that was short-lived because thereafter, my ex-husband did reach out and he, wanted some financial support. When I was unwilling to provide it, he subsequently began opening cases in Ohio, stating that I had abducted the children, that he was not aware of, where we were. So we did a lot of a year of back and forth litigation in Ohio while I was in Arizona. And that became so tiring. I had to continuously prove that, everything I did was on the up and up. I had to provide the documentation and they had to hear his case, so it was really tiring. So ultimately, I made a decision that I regret. Where, we had established residency in Arizona. So I said, let's have the case transferred here. I was very ignorant to the fact that Arizona had different guidelines and that it was more so at the discretion of the judge. So it happened that when the case was transferred here, he was able to, follow us here, and he was able to be granted joint custody of the children, even with there being a substantial history of domestic violence. And at the time of the hearing, I had a order of protection in place that had been validated because he had threatened to come here and kill me. So since then, that was May of this year, we began to exchange the children. Things have taken a terrible turn. shortly after that agreement went into place, which I wouldn't say agreement, shortly after that order went into place, my children, against their will, were forced to begin visiting with him. And one of my children had a mental and psychological breakdown. He's 7 years old. He became, suicidal, just very, very, just very gloomy. Just his aspect changed completely. And he was diagnosed with an adjustment disorder, anxiety and depression. And he began to experience enuresis during the day and also at night. Unfortunately, by this point, there had been an order put in place that medical decisions could not be made solely by me anymore. So I had to go to my ex-husband and request that we give him the counseling and the things that were recommended. And he denied that. He said, absolutely not. I do not want him to receive any counseling services. I'm not, want anyone to be aware of what goes on in my home. So then, I, tried to go back to court, and I just really had a hard time because what was, done was it was stated that the children's refusal to engage with him or, reluctance to do so was due to parental alienation. So I've really been fighting the system since that point, and things have become progressively, more abusive, even to the point where, one of my children had another breakdown. He had a seizure, and thereafter, he was made to go back to his father. Their abuse became physical with the children, and they reported to the school the abuse that they had undergone, and there was, physical evidence of it. Everything that they said was substantiated with the bruises and the scarring and the, knots in their head and on their back. Yes, was called, but, he was able to tell them that, no, this is not going on, and then show them the documentation report where they alleged parental alienation. So I'm really struggling to, save my children because they're fearful, and this system does not support, a woman. It does not support children as it relates to domestic violence when parental alienation is alleged.
I want to first say that it's so brave of you to publicly announce everything that you've been talking about. And my heart really goes out to you and your boys. And I also want to kind of bring it for the listeners out there to just take some time and just think about what Rachel discussed. So she discussed originally that the doctors went through their little checklist and they asked, if anything's happening. She said no. Then when she finally decided to leave, and there is this tension between what she knows is safe and healthy for her boys who were well adjusted in their new environment, and this big change of having to go back to their father and undergo terrible abuse. And when it's brought up, the legal system has failed them to a point in which is unimaginable. So I just want you guys to think about that when you are seeing your patients, making sure when I was seeing pediatric patients, I would always, from the time that they could speak, even if there are families where you think, oh, nothing would ever happen, have a part of your practice of, for 5 minutes, asking, can you see the child alone? And just building that rapport so that you can talk with them. And you'd be surprised, unfortunately, some things that people confess that may be going on that would surprise you. Other recommendations are, if your institution allows it, looking for a local child abuse clinic. There are specialists in pediatrics that work with child abuse. And even if that's something that you don't want to pursue in the future, it's definitely an experience that I believe every physician should have, so that when you're interacting with patients, you'll know the workflows of when to look for certain things, what questions to ask, what resources to bring, which we're going to talk about later. And maybe you guys can even write in some other resources if you guys know of it. But what things happen when this happens, and the reason that this is so near and dear to me is there are so many children out here going through those same things, and they don't have to, especially when they have stable, adjusted, loving parents that want to keep them safe. So I definitely want you guys to think about that and to realize that you are mandated reporters for any suspicion of abuse. So even if you suspect it and you don't, or you aren't sure, or there's an inkling, or if there's something in your gut, it's better to report it and be wrong and just say, oh, I thought something was off, than to miss it. I will confess that when I was in residency, a few of us shared some patients, and there were some children that didn't always seem to put together and things like that. And we brushed it off and some, but there was never any blatant signs of abuse. And a year after I graduated, a friend and I turned on the news and we saw our patients on the news. Their mother had left the three of them in their home alone because she was neglectful, and the house caught on fire and they died. So if there is any inkling of any abuse, definitely don't brush it off and think about how you can help families get through things. So that brings me to my next question of, you mentioned that your boys reported some of the abuse to school and their doctors know now. Are there any particular resources that they gave you that were helpful? Or what was the most helpful thing that was provided to you, aside from a listening ear, that the healthcare professionals gave you?
Well, I would say I've been very blessed to have located quickly when I moved to Arizona a really great pediatrician for my children, and I really feel comfortable with her. And so, immediately I made her aware of the fact, there had been domestic violence, and then when this reoccurred, I let her know, like, listen, what's going on. So the resources she provided to me more than anything was just, abuse hotlines and things of that nature. Unfortunately, Arizona is very well known to have a lot of issues with child abuse. So it's been really hard to tap into those resources, primarily because it just also happens that it's COVID. And so a lot of these service providers and resources are not available due to, the restrictions of COVID. So I definitely think there is a great need for resources as it relates to child abuse and protecting victims of domestic violence, even medically. As you stated earlier, even with I think a question that was really pivotal to me with my pediatrician, where I felt comfortable with her, is she asked specifically, wasn't a blanket question. She said, you said there's no abuse with you and your children. Where's Dad? And that opened up the conversation, the dialogue, that listen, this is what's going on. Because a lot of times as a parent, when a physician, asks about abuse, you immediately, you take a defense. Like, no, I'm not abusing my children. You see they're well cared for. And so we think of ourselves. But when you ask the question, and you frame it in such a way to say, listen, I know that you are the one who's present. Your children obviously have a loving relationship with you. But what is that relationship with the other parent? It allows that parent, the parent who is in front of you, to kind of, feel comfortable to unload and to disclose certain things, because they don't feel as if their parent is being attacked. So it's so important that, the question is framed in such a way that a parent feels, like, okay, I can disclose this. My child is not safe when they're with this other parent, but that has nothing to do with me, and I think that that's really the hardest thing, is that there's so much guilt as it relates to your child being abused. Though I've never abused my children, I carry so much guilt because, I chose the person who would then go on to hurt them. So I think, it's important for physicians to know, pediatricians to be aware of the fact that that parent who is coming into the visit, who has, loved their child, and they obviously have a close relationship with their child, they feel so guilty, possibly because though they're not hurting that child, somebody is.
That makes a good point, because we all have our defense mechanisms, and it is great that you pointed that out, that the physicians who are coming to talk to you have to think from a perspective of, how can I help? Or what are you going through? Or what is stressing you? Instead of pointing fingers and things, and making people feel comfortable being vulnerable, basically, at what's going on, because that is the point when you have these open conversations and you're able to not be judgmental, where you can kind of get to the root of what's going on, because there may have been signs. You mentioned that one of your sons is really struggling with the adjustment and things. And there can be subtle signs, and I'm sure that it's grown over time with a lot of the stress. But a lot of times some physicians may see a child whose grades may have dropped in school, or they may be becoming a little more aggressive or a little more tearful, or something that is not outright obvious, and they may label them as having ADHD or something else. But sometimes it's good to take a step back and kind of figure out and talk about what's going on.
Absolutely.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. It's a complicated process, and even students with great grades and MCAT scores get left out. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for admissions advising. Our advisors are all physicians and former admissions committee members, so they know exactly what medical schools are looking for. One-on-one admissions advising from Med School Coach makes all the difference. Our expert team will help you develop a game plan, prepare your application, edit your essays, and coach you for interviews. Every pre-med has a story, and we'll help you tell it so you can stand out from the crowd. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach admissions advising package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
So moving forward, you mentioned that you guys are in a dispute right now, and the legal system has not necessarily been putting the children's best interest at heart. You've had a restraining order placed on your ex-husband, and he has not really been following that and threatening you to harm you, and he has actually physically harmed the children, yet he's still allowed to see them. And you have gone to the judges, and they have been nonchalant.
Absolutely.
I know that you want to, obviously, number one, keep you and your family safe. Is there any way that you have thought that perhaps our listeners could even help?
I think the best way for someone entering the medical field to be a great assistant to a mother or a father who is in a situation where there's domestic violence, spousal abuse and child abuse, is really to establish that rapport, and then to report. As you stated earlier, if there's a suspicion, just report it. It's better to err on the side of caution, because the signs are there. The signs will be there. And if something doesn't feel right, it usually is not right, and then if and when abuse is disclosed, to really follow up. So, I know a lot of times doctors are so busy, they do so much work, and, pediatricians are swamped with different children and different things and, obligations they might have. But it's so important not to let, someone fall in between the cracks. If someone, if you have a patient and you have a suspicion that something's going on, make that call and then follow up, because a lot of times a parent who is not abusing the children, they need that support. And I think that's been the greatest obstacle and barrier, is a lack of support. There's a scarlet letter put on parents when there is abuse and, someone has alleged parental alienation. I mean, it's a very, very terrible, terrible thing. So once that has been alleged, a lot of times in the system, it's pretty much everything that happens thereafter is, just really discounted. It's discounted, even bruises, even, other incidents. With me, even as recent as my ex-husband presented himself at my job with a loaded gun and waited in the parking lot. When that was reported, because there had been parental alienation alleged, they said, he has the right to be in the school because the children attend that school. And the fact that there was a loaded weapon and he's waiting in the parking lot was completely discounted, and, it was, basically brushed aside. So it's so important. I would say most important is to be an advocate for your patients. Let them feel they have somebody who is on their side. And that makes all the difference.
At Med School Coach, we know that studying for the MCAT exam can be challenging, especially for busy students on the go. That's why our team created MCAT Prep, the only all-encompassing study app built specifically for the MCAT. MCAT Prep by Med School Coach provides student access to extremely high-quality content and a personalized curriculum for free. The app has more than 250 videos, 1,000 flashcards, and 1,000 unique MCAT questions. Plus, MCAT Prep by Med School Coach allows students to create a personalized study schedule and track progress over time. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into medical school. And now you can put the experts from Med School Coach into your pocket. It's the closest pre-med students can come to a personal tutor without spending a penny. Download MCAT Prep by Med School Coach for free at medschoolcoach.com/MCAT. Or download it directly from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and MCAT Prep by Med School Coach can help.
I appreciate that advice, especially coming from a perspective of someone who's gone through it and you being able to say advocacy comes first, which also brings me to some ideas and maybe some homework assignment for our people out there listening. We would like to advocate for you as well. This is a very stressful time and you're still going through it. So this is something that's active. We're not reflecting, listeners. And as she's mentioned some really scary things, like her ex came to her job and came to the children's school with guns. Like, that's not okay. And the children have reported bruises and being abused physically and emotionally very recently. So I would just implore you guys who are listening to share this podcast with anyone and everyone that you possibly could. If you do have any suggestions for things aside from medical legal aid, I know there are some organizations out there that may be able to help. So share it with them and see if we can get some different legal representation. If there are any child therapists out there that you want to share this with for some tips or some referrals to certain people to help with the children's adjustment. And at the very basic level, working to change these laws and to get these judges and people in the judicial system out who do not have the best interest of the safety of women and children and who do not take domestic violence seriously. So if you could write letters to the officials and your congressman or her congressman, not even yours, because hopefully you guys are nationwide, but in Arizona and Phoenix, and you said Maricopa County, that would be amazing on behalf of Rachel Barnett and her family. And I'm just going to leave you to let the listeners know how they can reach out to you if they come up with any resources to help. And you can contact Rachel, or you can go on my Instagram at Dr. DOCTOR, the letter D, and then Graham, GRAM, or reach out to Med School Coach's Instagram as well, and just send us some tips.
Definitely. I would appreciate any support and resources available. I really have run into, a brick wall as it relates to sources that are able to provide support. I've been so blessed to receive support from people, different phone numbers to call and different organizations who could possibly help. But I'm at a loss. I'm really at a loss. But my situation was one in which my ex-husband was able to acquire joint custody, but he was able to maintain the agreement that he provide no support for the children. So I'm still financially responsible for the boys, and this has really caused me to be, in need as far as legal representation, because I'm supporting 5 children on my own, and he is not. So he was able to acquire legal representation and put me at a disadvantage. So the support that I need, and just all mothers going through this at this time in Maricopa County, I am not an anomaly. This is an ongoing thing here. It's just really any resources that will assist with legal representation, or even being able to provide support and a mother representing herself if she feels that she's able to do so. Resources as it relates to counseling for the children. Because even now, I have, done so many referrals for counseling for my children, and I'm been, called back and told, well, because there are 4 children who might need counseling, it's going to be a delay, and it's been months and months, and my children have been without the services needed to assist them, and really processing what happened to them and getting them to the place where they're able to heal and they're able to, be the best versions of themselves. So these sources are so needed. And so I can be reached if anyone has any resources or any knowledge of someone who can assist in Maricopa County and Phoenix. I will greatly appreciate it. And I can be reached at Rachel, Rachel.Cardona, Cardona, the number 86 at yahoo.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being so brave to share this story. And for all of the listeners out here, if you take anything from this, aside from being an advocate and going to help and working to help this particular family, is that there are so many families out there with very similar stories. So keep your eyes open, keep your heart open, be a good listener, and be an advocate. And I'm just going to give you an opportunity to say goodbye. And I definitely really appreciate you for coming and sharing your story.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. It really is my hope that, and going forward with this and really just being very public and very transparent, that I will help other women who are in similar circumstances to be able to come forward and that we will affect systematic change. This is an issue, not just with my case, it's an issue across the country where women, leave abusive relationships, are given praise and accolades for getting out of the abusive relationship, getting their children free, and then they run into far worse abuse through the judicial system where they are then made to feel as if, you can get out, but your children have to stay. So I just really thank you so much. This topic is a very, very, very personal one now. And it's one that I feel very passionately about. And I truly, truly hope that we are able to affect change. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And for all of the listeners out there, feel free to comment. Feel free to send us any messages or emails or social media things. And you can check in again with me next week and we will be talking about another topic. So I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.